Just because someone says something a lot, first time shame on them, second time shame on you, doesn't make it true. And this is one of those cases. Many survivors carry the wounds of the shame on me. I'm the one who stuck around, shame on me. There is no shame in not knowing, the shame lies in not finding out. I found this to be kind of an interesting proverb, because I think that this one kind of gets at it's that the shame is the almost like the lack of curiosity or acting on it once you get to know it. Now, a big contention in the world of narcissistic abuse is whether those who are experiencing narcissistic abuse are something called simply being codependent. Now, those of you who know me know my stance on that. To me, the answer is typically no. Codependency is a term that has been too widely and unfortunately appropriated to pathologize survivors of narcissistic abuse. The term originates from the substance use world and refers to someone who derives their self-esteem and links their emotional state to the ups and downs of another person, as though the codependent person, has no model of self, no identity or self-esteem within themselves. They derive it from a person outside of themselves. And the codependent person will often maintain a sense of dependency for both individuals. So offering money to the addict, offering them a place to stay, or even offering them drugs or alcohol, keeping both individuals, the addict and the codependent person, in a toxic dance. Codependent relationships are typically enacted by the codependent person and the other person who either has a substance use issue or personality disorder. That's how we typically see it play out. Now, here's why I don't always agree with this for narcissistic abuse. Codependent people are and have been in denial for a long time. In a way, they mirrored the dynamic of denial observed in the substance user. This is quite different than survivors of narcissistic abuse, most but not all. And this is where this proverb kind of seems to apply and matter. For many survivors, largely because for the longest time narcissistic abuse wasn't talked about, nobody knew, people simply weren't taught about narcissism, what it is, how it affects us, that you aren't to blame, and on, right? Somehow, everyone was content to let the survivors of these relationships go on blaming themselves and never holding the narcissistic people accountable for their toxic behavior. And now, here we are. We have information and platforms on which to share it. And in a large majority of cases, once a person understands what narcissism is, that it doesn't change, and so on and so forth, they start making different choices. Some folks get out of the relationships, others set boundaries, others disengage. Some folks say, okay, I can't get out and this sucks, but it sort of feels different knowing that this is a thing and it's not in my head. Radical acceptance, building up other supports, slowly breaking out of cycles of self-blame. That's not codependency. That's the finding out. That's the knowing. If this isn't taught to folks in school, and most mental health practitioners don't talk about it, and it's not shared in other forums other than in a handful of books and places like on this and other YouTube channels or other places where this kind of information gets out there, then how is someone supposed to find out and learn about this? Again, the shame is not in the not knowing. It's in the not finding out. That was actually once the fate of many people experiencing narcissistic abuse in a different generation. If the therapist didn't call it out and nobody understood it, then lots of people suffered in silence, blaming themselves for a really long time. And since most therapists did not call it out or even understand it, it is only now that we are seeing a reckoning on this issue of narcissistic abuse. So now, anybody who wants to know about narcissism theoretically can know because the information is so readily available. And armed with that knowledge, you do need to make choices decisions and recognize that you cannot take responsibility for their behavior, but you can take responsibility for knowing about it, and now there are ways to know. I never cease to be amazed at how many people are willing to pathologize the survivors of narcissistic abuse and survivors of narcissist scams and their grifter behaviors. The survivors are called foolish. They're shamed for staying in the relationships or even getting into the relationships in the first place. They're shamed for choosing friends badly. They're shamed for choosing partners badly. They're shamed for leaving the relationships. Survivors really can't win. Maybe, just maybe, everyone is so scared of being played that it's easier to shame the survivors instead of recognizing that without understanding narcissism, and even when people do understand it, all of us are vulnerable to the narcissistic people's charms and machinations. You have to be willing to find out. Once you know, it's important that you do not fall into the well of thinking that you will be the exception, or to be in denial, or to compartmentalize. As the proverb says, once you know, you do have to be willing to find out, to observe the narcissistic people's behavior through this more informed lens. Knowing is only half the journey. The rest of it is believing it and putting that knowledge into action, whether that's boundaries, disengagement, no contact, light contact, or just no longer blaming yourself. So lots of people who have been through narcissistic relationships sadly will often view themselves as damaged, whether because they had a narcissistic parent or parents, partner, or even a workplace or a friend. People who come out of narcissistic relationships, once they're through them, may view themselves as untrusting, as not good at relationships, as foolish, codependent, lacking in confidence, not believing in themselves, not knowing who they are. After one of these relationships, you may feel passive, like you are what happened to you, that the fallout of the relationship, the anxiety, the self-blame, the ruination, the isolation, the self-doubt, and the gaslighted things that you were told that you are, that you're needy, selfish, overly sensitive, extra, that those things are true. And so you walk around feeling damaged by the relationship. As life goes on, you may leave the relationship feeling broken. And then that can mean that you don't take risks, that you don't believe that you'll achieve any of the goals that you set for yourself. You may not feel comfortable entering relationships, or you may sell yourself short overall. After a narcissistic relationship, our perceptions of the world and of other people can shift. We don't feel as safe in the world, and so as a result, we will be less trusting of other people. We may assume that other people's motives and motivations are bad, people we know, even people we don't know. And it may take a while to warm up or trust someone new. We may not get as excited about a promise or something promising that's coming up. We may have realistic expectations. We may have realistic expectations that can be perceived as a downer by other people. We may over-prepared or be almost obsessive in double and triple checking stuff that even most annoys other people. We may continue to want to take care of everything ourselves and not trust other people to help us out or to leave halfway. We may be suspicious of warm, charming, friendly, certainly charismatic people, and we may roll our eyes at stuff that is overly romantic or optimistic. And people may also look at us sideways when we do this. We may get feedback that we are overly cynical or overly suspicious or even humorless or joyless or not fun. And of course, all of that reinforces that sense of the damage that so many survivors hold about themselves. But let's walk that back a bit, because yes, some of the stuff that happens to us isn't always good for us interpersonally in the long term. And with time, therapy, safety, support, some of that vigilance does drop. But by and large, in my experience, survivors of narcissistic relationships do need time to build up trust with new folks and may be a little suspicious at times of other people's motivations or motives. They may be a little slow to warm up. You may often want to double check to ensure that things are done properly. Listen, you get burned enough times, and these are normal, even smart responses. So some of these changes in you seem like wisdom. Taking a minute and studying someone more carefully, taking time until someone earns your trust, wanting to ensure that you protect yourself and get things done correctly because you know that you may not be protected. Is that really damage? Or could we not see that as wisdom? Especially in the world as it has become with everything so quickly. I have had countless survivors say to me, "Ugh, Dr. RAMANI, I'm so damaged. I need to get to know someone so well before I trust them. Maybe it takes me too long to trust." Or some people say to me, "I do sometimes wonder what people are hiding when things are too shiny and perfect on the outside." That's fine. Take the time. Do the process of discovery. There was once a time when, in order to love or be seen, you had to suspend all of your instincts and trust an unsafe process that you knew in your body wasn't right. Healing means that we learn from what happened. We don't let it define us. You aren't an untrusting person. Instead, we learn from it. You learn it takes you longer to trust, but with enough healthy, safe experiences, you get there. We're so quick to say that folks who go through emotionally abusive relationship and then are slow to throw their hats back into the ring of dating or relationships, or that take their time with trust, are cynical or jaded or broken or damaged. Not so much. We learn from what happened to us, we integrate it, and we use it to navigate the world. If that means that you value yourself now, to believe that trust should be earned, then in my book, that's wisdom. So here's an interesting scenario. Let's talk about this. You are no longer trauma bonded, but you can't get out of the relationship. So it is a mistake to assume that anyone who remains in a toxic relationship is trauma bonded. Many are, but not all. To all the trauma bonded folks out there, the ones who feel like, I can't leave this. I know it's terrible, but I can't. I want to, but then I don't know. And there's fear and all kinds of stuff, right? You understand what's happening for you, I hope. Even if you intellectually get it, you're finding that it's difficult, if not impossible, to let go and get out. You have fear, you have hope. You may still believe there's some possibility of change. You feel a sense of panic at the idea of ending the relationship. You may wonder if they'll change once you leave, if you leave. And this can apply in families too. Is the family just going to forget about me? You wonder if maybe you were the problem. You don't want to have no family in the world. You feel pushed and pulled. There's rumination. You make excuses. All of you who are trauma bonded, you know the drill. We all know the drill. But then there are those of you who are in toxic relationships and you are not trauma bonded. Not only do you see it clearly, but you would also be thrilled if this relationship no longer existed. You may be stuck because of minor children and are trying to avoid a disaster, a family court or custody situation, or you don't trust that the other parent will do the right thing with these kids, and you also know that they'll try to get more custody than they should just to punish you. You may be stuck for financial reasons. You may be stuck for cultural reasons. You may be stuck for safety reasons. And then there are infinite other variants where you still have contact, far more than you want, with a narcissistic person. And if circumstances were different, you would be out. Whatever the circumstances are, you see it completely clearly. You dread the time you have to spend with them. You know their behavior is inexcusable, and you don't make justifications or excuses. You wish the partner would leave and find someone else and just not be interested in the kids. You recognize that your situation is being kept in place by just money issues, and you may try to figure out ways to get some, and know that if you had enough, you have lottery dreams, you know you'd be out. And even though this sounds dark, you know that things will be much easier following the passing of the narcissistic parent or partner or whomever the person is. There is no lack of clarity. You would love to get out, but it can't work. Family court doesn't care that your children will be harmed by a narcissistic parent. Your own narcissistic parent doesn't care about the harm they're bringing into everyone's lives. So when you face up against this indifference by systems and everyone else, people stay. You radically accepted a long time ago, but you don't see a clear path out. This is not an easy path. To be not trauma bonded, but stuck in one of these relationships, means that you don't even have the stuff like hope to keep you going. Instead, you get to live in a stew of grief, anger, disgust, more anger, and more grief. It will take a toll on you over time. It's not an if, it's a when. That you may get sick, or maybe a little depressed. So how do you stave off that toll? There's some things: social support, meaningful relationships outside of the narcissistic relationship or system, meaningful work, hobbies, connection to community, moments of awe, therapy, support groups. In a strange way, not being trauma bonded makes all of this harder. When we are trauma bonded, we are in a belief system that is making sense of it for us. The excuses we make in the face of the cognitive dissonance, the hope when we are trauma bonded. We are fighting for something. Even though what we're fighting for is basically jousting at windmills, that's quite tragic, right? But in the day-to-day, it may strangely and paradoxically be a little easier to be trauma bonded. Because to be stuck and not trauma bonded is a bit like having to go cold turkey, white knuckle, commando style, no net under the tightrope kind of stuff, and that is not easy. There is no end to it. It's staying and knowing that there's nothing you can do to make this better. And that can feel like a whole lot of existential dread and nihilism. Ongoing gaslighting, a one-sided relationship at best, or one that feels devoid of anything approximating meaningful connection. Strangely, in the long run, it does pay off because trauma-bonded folks get their hearts rebroken repeatedly. The non-trauma bonded stuck group, maybe it's not a broken heart, but you're just exhausted and depleted and having to constantly cycle through this grief. And you do always feel like you're, again, a little bit on your back foot, but you definitely have clarity. Again, it's not as much of the heartbreak. Nothing surprises you anymore. But it just sucks to have to live or interact with someone who is so selfish, entitled, unempathic, manipulative, and unself-aware. It sucks. There's no other way to put it. Being gaslighted feels gross and tiresome, and you sort of feel like you lose your faith in humanity. None of that feels good. But in this situation, you are clear. So you aren't necessarily ruminating in that same can't come to a solution way. You may even be able to be quite transparent with other people about the unpleasantness of your situation and may not feel as compelled to put such a nice bow on it for optics. I once used the analogy of having a place you live in that you really like, but it backs up against a train line. And you know that the tracks and the train are there running through your backyard. You don't think that they're going to magically disappear. And for a goodly amount of the day, you love the place you live in. It's great. But when that train roars through and the dishes rattle, you roll your eyes and say, oh yeah, there, that train. The non-trauma bonded narcissistic relationship we can't readily get out of is that train. There are a lot of good moments when you make it work, especially with things outside of the relationship. You may enjoy a job, friends, kids, pets, daily activities. But from the words of Johnny Cash, that train just keeps a-rolling, and that's what tortures me. However, someday you probably, hopefully, will get out of this relationship. The kids will turn 18, you quit the job, or you qualify for retirement. Hell, maybe even the family member passes away, and guess what? You feel better. You may even look around and say, okay, the relationship is done. Is this supposed to be harder? Like, I feel pretty good. Nah, the train stopped. The tracks are gone. You will function better. You'll feel better. Your health will improve. Your mind will be clear. You may wonder if you aren't very nice because you're happy it's over. You're fine. A stressor was removed. The stress is over, and you feel better. There may be a little bit of grief and guilt thrown in there, but in the macro, you feel better. And maybe that's the hope. Not the hope that they change, but that with time, circumstances will. And in the meantime, you do get to have clarity about it all, even if it isn't always pleasant. Have you ever had anyone say to you, first time, shame on them, second time, shame on you? Let's unpack that. This proverb sounds so pithy and clever, but it's a real problem for survivors of these relationships. So that seems quick, right? First time, second time, right? But this proverb, or this saying, is about shame. And shame is a central burden that many survivors of narcissistic relationships carry, right? So let's, again, whether this proverb, adage, or whatever it is, it carries this slightly judgmental tenor that the first time someone does you wrong, well, that was them behaving badly, and that's not cool. Shame on them for behaving badly. However, the next time you are wronged by that person's behavior, well, shame on you for sticking around. To which I say, no, no, just no, absolutely no. This is basically a proverb or a saying that codifies blaming the person who is being mistreated. The idea that, well, now that you know what they're about, you just need to get away from them. And if you don't get away from them and they harm or hurt you again, well then, shame on you. They're the one who harmed you, but shame on you. That seems rather draconian, extreme, unempathic, and it kind of lets the world and the abuser off the hook. Yeah, sure, that person is being terrible to her, but shame on her, she knew it was coming. Just because someone says something a lot, first time shame on them, second time shame on you, doesn't make it true. And this is one of those cases. Many survivors carry the wounds of the shame on me. I'm the one who stuck around, shame on me. And this mindset makes healing from these relationships so much more difficult. First, it means that a person who is in a narcissistic or toxic relationship may simply start withdrawing. This idea of shame has already been internalized by you if you're stuck in one of these relationships. And then the idea that the world will double shame you, well, shame on you, means that withdrawing is self-protective in a way. Either you will get the, well, you know that's how she is, just get over it. Or, well, you're the one who chose to stay. Rarely do people say, what that person did to you was not okay. The proverbial victim blaming is sort of a terrible built-in feature of our society at large because it creates a sense of pseudo-safety in the world. Well, that bad thing happened to that person because they stuck around, rather than having to take note and having to call out that there are really toxic people and patterns in the world at large. It makes the world scarier. Second, it can also be an impediment when things like this are said to people. It can impede them from seeking out help when they're in any kind of narcissistic relationship. The idea of, well, if I tell this therapist all the stuff that's happened in this relationship, they're going to think I'm the one with the problem, or I'm the foolish or stupid one for sticking around. It can create a fear, as though therapy could be this shameful confessional where you share what happens in your relationship repeatedly, and there's a risk that that person will ask you, well, why are you still in it? First, if a therapist asks you why you're still in it or why you didn't leave, find a new therapist. But if you work with someone who gets this, that won't be what happened. It actually makes sense why you stay. Whether it's the second time, 250th time, or 1000th time they do something bad to you, there is no shame. Third, not everyone understands, most people don't understand how complex this process is. Trauma bonding, self-blame, betrayal blindness, cognitive dissonance. The deck is stacked against you, and your nervous system is trying to protect you. So you're not going to always be able to process memories of the bad things that happen, and you may disproportionately hold on to the good days or justify or make the pieces fit. So when the bad stuff happens, and it always will in a narcissistic relationship, you are then left with, well, I stayed, so shame on me? No, actually it means that all of these things, trauma bonding and all the rest of it, are expectable responses to emotionally abusive and confusing relationships. In fact, if you did get up and leave after the first few times that something bad was done to you, that's actually what would be the shocker. And since most of you in narcissistic relationships have been in these relationships for a while, these relationships are a process of indoctrination and a slow process of subjugation and the loss of your identity and your reality. And finally, the architecture of these relationships, the idealization that happens early on, the confusion when the bad days start trickling in, and that it takes a minute to reconcile the good and bad days. The problem with the first time shame on them, second time shame on you model is that it does not account for the constant shape-shifting that happens in these relationships. That a bad thing may happen, shame on them, but then it's really good or fine for a while. Then the bad thing happens again. It may feel like the first time again, because if enough time passes. This carousel between good and bad is why people get stuck. On average, it takes people at least 12 months to even begin connecting the dots on the idea that this may not be a healthy relationship. And by then, the trauma-bonded, cognitively dissonant stuff has firmly taken hold, especially if you have a history of these relationships in your family of origin or in your prior relationships. So it can feel like a lot of first times. The social media and digital landscape of our world also means that quick messaging is often being used to communicate subtle dynamics in these kinds of relationships. Most of the rules about relationships do not apply when we are talking about narcissistic relationships. So the second time shame on you may feel like an appealing, quick kind of rule, but it is harmful as hell when it's accorded towards people who are in narcissistic relationships. Being emotionally invalidated and abused in a relationship is not about shame on you. It's about shame on the person abusing you, always. Showing yourself grace and understanding that there is no shame in caring about someone and giving someone a second chance or pushing away the bad memories. All of that's normal. And in many cases, it's been happening since you were a child. It's not like a child can say, well, first time shame on you, Pop, but now shame on me. That kid probably carries a shame always. No shame ever. Another person's bad behavior is their responsibility, not yours. So the struggle really becomes is that people need to stop this quick idea, well, if you stayed in it, you knew what you were buying. It's almost like, well, you bought that car that had a problem. This isn't buying a car. This isn't about saying shame on you because you stayed. It's about people needing to understand how subtle and often really, really entrenched these dynamics can be, why people get stuck. And then by using this shame on you language, people will often feel that if I say what's happening, people are going to think I'm foolish. Nobody wants to feel foolish. It makes sense why people stay, and for a very long time. It makes sense why they often can't extricate. We live in a world where we shame people for being estranged in their families, and then we shame them for enduring abuse. So when it comes to the world at large, you really can't win. But in your own life, at least give yourself permission to dial down the shame when you can, when you hear nonsense like this. Listen, if you don't have a lot of money, narcissistic relationships will actually take a far, far greater toll on you. Not having enough money is a stressor. It saps your bandwidth. There's good research showing that. And it can mean that solving any problem becomes far more complicated. Problems are a lot easier to fix when you've got money. When you don't have money, you may not be able to afford good quality therapy. Could be that the free therapy you can access may not be well matched to what you need. You may have an unstable housing situation. You may not have access to reliable transportation. You may be living with food insecurity. You may not be able to get ahead of your debt and do the things that would help with stress management, like a day off. Even in the best of circumstances, not having financial resources is a horrible stressor. If you're dealing with a toxic relationship, it literally feels almost impossible. And you might even feel that all the content out there doesn't even begin to scratch the surface on what you're going through. A lot of the guidance on narcissistic abuse, and I'll be very open and frank, I believe I've made that mistake too, assumes that people have some level of resources, access to therapy, the ability to move somewhere else if you need, the luxury of launching into a job search, having enough time to be able to journal or meditate, being able to afford an attorney, to get health care. If you don't have resources, you may even be stuck living with a very narcissistic family of origin, or having some of them live with you. You may not be able to afford a caregiver for an elderly narcissistic parent who needs care, or not being able to balance childcare. So you may get stuck in a job with an abusive boss just because the hours or the locations work. And because of this, when a person who has limited resources, limited money, is in a narcissistic relationship, even if they want to leave, for example, leave a marriage or a long-term relationship, honest to goodness, it's almost simply not possible. I live in Southern California where rent is eye-wateringly expensive. And hell, even middle-class folks who even own their houses are stuck staying married because they can't afford to split the equity in the house, because half of that money, even if they made a lot of money on that house, won't buy anything here anymore. And if that money is just used on rent, it's going to run out pretty quick. People also may not be able to move away, where they may have better supports or more affordable housing. If they have minor children, then they have to stay often where they are, near the other co-parent, even if that person's toxic. So then radical acceptance isn't exactly the same as it would be for someone who has resources. Radical acceptance, sadly, then kind of becomes an acceptance of stuck, like really stuck. And that's going to have a very different kind of mental health toll. So many people are stuck in these toxic relationships because they simply do not have the means to get out. They can't afford an attorney, or childcare, or rent, or therapy. And so they stay in something that is continuing to take a pretty marked toll on them, on top of the stress that not having enough money is already causing. You already feel so helpless in one of these relationships. Nothing you say works, makes it better. Nothing you do works. You have to give up so much of yourself just to get through most days. And hope is a dangerous thing, since it is likely to go south really fast. The not having resources is a multiplier on that helplessness and hopelessness. And there's also the added frustration that most of the content out there on narcissism and narcissistic relationship, videos, books, whatever, most of it is based on having some access to resources, enough to get some basic help. But listen, if you don't have money, you may not even have a great internet connection or a reliable cell service or the stuff that would even allow you to listen to a video like this or get a book or get the information that you need on a regular basis. When I started thinking about this video, I didn't have any easy answers. I don't think I do still. The best I was hoping to offer up was an empathy and a recognition, frankly, that there's a double helplessness that people who do not have financial resources face. And as a result, people in these circumstances may also feel more shamed or self-blaming. Look at me, I'm staying in something that's so unhealthy. It becomes important to understand the logistics of why you're staying. It's a reason a lot of people stay. You may end up moving back in with a narcissistic family of origin, and that can feel horrible. It can be just absolutely horrible. But you can also see it wholly, fully, and armed with what you know about how these dynamics and systems work. Learn to talk to yourself internally in a different way. None of this is easy. Being exposed to that, even when you know what it is, takes a toll on you. Realistic expectations are available to anyone, regardless of how many resources they have. And in the case of folks who are strapped and living close to the bone, to understand that your decisions, while they may not be optimal, are informed by that, those realistic expectations as well. That you may be having to make decisions that will protect children or other family members or yourself. As I talk with more people around the world about this, financial limitation is jumping out at me as a major issue that people facing narcissistic families and relationships and workplaces are grappling with. And while you do not and will not have the luxury of making the big changes in a safe way that someone with money could, there are still the micro changes that are a possibility. Practicing not going deep, not defending, not engaging, not explaining, not personalizing. Engaging in little steps to break out of the self-blame. Finding small ways of stretching into your true self, even if it's laughing loud at something when you are alone, or having something you love reading and keeping it to yourself so it isn't ridiculed. And definitely no longer looking to the narcissist for validation or recognition, sharing information with them that they're just going to invalidate, and learning to disengage in a very intentional way. I know that all of this is still putting a Band-Aid on a gushing wound, but those tiny changes and recognition that these relationships are never any of our fault is crucial. But I do think that people who are trying to cope with narcissistic abuse with very limited resources are facing a very, very unique kind of steep slope. And so much of the conversation often becomes about that what we call psychosocial stuff, housing and transport and childcare and jobs and money. And all of that's obviously survival level stuff. But lost in this conversation can often be the additional toll a toxic relationship is putting on someone and the absolute inescapability of that circumstance. The inescapability, the powerlessness, the inability to turn it off, the lack of capacity for safe escape can often mean that what accumulates in these relationships can slowly but surely accumulate into what feels like complex trauma. I hope that's helpful, and thank you again.